Well, thank you, Eleanor, for inviting me here to talk to you about Brussels, and especially how I see Belgium and Brussels and what I would like to share with you. I come from Iceland. I've been living here for the last 4 years approximately, and this is my third time living in Belgium. So I've been going back and forth from Belgium and Iceland since I was 8. So Belgium is very near and dear to me, and I love sharing Belgium with people because I think it's a very underestimated place to live in and to visit. So I'm gonna start sharing my slides with you. All right, do you have it here?
Yes.
Yes, great. All right. So the caption of this breakfast conference is going all out and about in Brussels on less sunny days. Well, I must say I think it's quite bold to get on Icelandic guy to give that lecture, given the weather we have in Iceland. But to start with, I would actually recommend to you, it doesn't matter how long you've lived in Belgium, that you go on a guided tour. It's simply a very efficient way to get to know some history and to get some tips on what to do and see. So, and if you've been on a tour, you should take another one. The guides, they vary and the topics are endless. I myself, I try to go often on tours, and every time I learn something new, get new tips and insights on what to see and do. And this is, of course, just my humble and very, very neutral opinion. I don't know how long you've all lived here or how well you are acquainted with Brussels. So I decided to put together 2 alternatives for you on how to spend your day off. That is maybe the most obvious options. So the options need to be COVID friendly at the time, try to get you away from your computers, adjustable in the amount of travel and exercise, and also to give you some insight into Belgian history and culture. That's simple enough, right? Well, here is my first suggestion. It's the Tram Museum that is in Biebulem. And to visit the museum and take the ride on the old tram up to Tervuren and visit the Africa Museum and the Tervuren Park. So this is a very classic suggestion, I would say, but what is important here is that there is a story to be told. Simply visiting sites and museum isn't the same thing as visiting it when you have some context. So, first of all, Belgians were quite the front runners when it came to locomotive travel. They were the second country in the world to build a railway. And in 1835, just 5 years after the independence, they had laid down tracks between Brussels and Mechelen. It was the first steam train to run on mainland Europe. And you see the locomotive over there, and it was called Le Belge. And you have to say it that way. It's got this oomph to it when you say it that way, Le Belge. But although being such forward thinkers, there were some skeptical voices about this new endeavor the Belgians were taking on. The newspapers and the public frequently discussed their concerns about these fast trains passing by the fields and causing the milks and the cows to curdle and the eggs turning into omelets. And they also questioned the ability for humans to ride on such fast-moving objects if they were actually able to breathe at such a high speed. It's actually very fun to read those articles and discussions. So Victor Hugo was one of them wrote about his experience riding a engine here in Belgium. He came in the 1840s, and in the Voyage en Belgique, he wrote, "It's a magnificent movement and one must have felt to realize it. The speed is incredible. The flowers on the side of the road are no longer flowers. They are spots, or rather red or white stripes, no more points, everything becomes striped. The iron horse is a monster that man has successfully tamed." Well, you can for sure say that this is a man who feels empowered by the experience, right? But in a letter he wrote to his wife about the same journey, about two trains meeting in the opposite direction, he wrote, "It was the most terrifying thing. Oops. You could see neither carriages nor passengers, just black and white shapes in a short whirlwind." So I guess he wasn't as brave as he was portraying in the Voyage en Belgique. And now for the tram track. So at this time, Belgium is, the industrialization in Belgium is booming. And they really wanted to be leading and modern, having the big countries all around them, France, England, Germany. They wanted to be a real player among the big states. So they frequently hosted universal exhibitions. And so again, in the year 1897, it was time for another one. And of course, who is the driving force behind all of this? None other than Leopold II, which you see up there. And for the Expo of 1897, he had three grand ideas. The Expo should be at the Cinquantenaire Park, which I think we all know, which was new at the time, and the Royal Domain in Tervuren. The colonial exhibition should be in Tervuren, while all the other exhibitions should be in the Cinquantenaire. The only problem is that this is 10 kilometers apart, and he wanted to ensure that people could get easily from one point to the other. So he needed good connection. He wanted there to be more than just a simple road. He wanted specifically a tram between the two sides. The tram was supposed to go along the Avenue de Tervuren, ride alongside the beautiful houses into the woods, and finally you would arrive at your destination in the chateau, palace in Tervuren. And here on top you can see somewhat of an advertising poster for this exhibition, for the Expo of 97. You see the original idea behind the Cinquantenaire. The arch is a bit different there. And then behind you can see the road or the tram tracks leading to Tervuren. And in the bottom right corner, you will see the old tram that you would be taking from the Tram Museum to Tervuren. Arriving in Tervuren, the visitors of the exhibition would experience the colonial palace, which is now the African Museum. The colonial exhibition's aim was first and foremost to win over investors for Leopold II in Congo. And he wanted to gain support from the Belgian people as well, because this was not very popular with the Belgian people. They were not keen on colonizing. They wanted to focus domestically. But this was his own pet project to colonize Central Africa, Congo. And then later on, we all know what happened. The two parts of the exhibition were, the first one was inside the palace, where he exhibited the many splendors of Africa, of the colony, the great natural resources, and of course also how the colonizers humbly helped the natives to civilize. You can see in the top picture there one of the exhibitions inside. And outside there was a typical colonial village, the Congolese village, to demonstrate the daily life of the villagers. 267 Congolese men, women, and children were taken by force to Belgium to exhibit to the public, them to the public, like in a zoo. So you can imagine this is not something you would see today. The people, they were kept in very poor conditions. You can see they lived in these houses. You know, African huts will not hold very well here in Belgium. But that's how they lived during that summer. And that summer it was very cold and wet. And well, I wouldn't like to stay in a hut like that in a cold and wet summer in Belgium. So many of them fell ill, and 7 of them died. And they, the ones that were that died, they were denied a burial at the local cemetery. So they were buried in an unconsecrated ground for adulterers and suicides. And it wasn't until 1953 that the remains of these bodies were moved to a nearby Catholic church, because of course they had all been converted by the colonizers. The museum was left pretty much the way it was from the Expo, although it went through some changes. But for many years, the museum was heavily criticized for an unupdated or outdated and colonial perspective. And it was, I think, around the 2000s that they finally decided to do some reconstruction and evaluation in cooperation with Congolesian people to update and revise it. And it was finally opened again in 2018. And here you see at the top the palace in Tervuren, where the African Museum is, and how the exhibition is portrayed today. It's a huge museum. It's well worth taking the visit there. It's focused on natural resources, natural history of Africa, Central Africa, and a big part of the editing of the museum was to uplift African culture and history of the people. There is a small section devoted to the colonial past and the terrors and horrors that happened during that time. It's debated if it's enough or if it should be, the focus shouldn't be on that period, but the positive aspect of Congolesian people. So, I mean, visit and judge for yourself what you think. And in the bottom corner there, you can see the tombstones, the graves of the 7 people who died during the Expo. And mind you, this was not the first and the last time that this happened, this kind of human zoo. It also happened in 1958 Expo that it was in Laken. Well, that was the end of the first trip. And for our second trip, I would like to take you to the Sonian Forest. The Sonian Forest was actually, a little anecdote here, was actually a favorite hunting ground for the Imperial Habsburg family. And you can see here in this Renaissance tapestry, this is one piece of the hunts of Maximilian tapestries that are in the Louvre in Paris. So if you're in Paris, and once the borders are open again, and go to the Louvre, you will find the 12 tapestries of Maximilian's hunt, and you can see Tervuren. Well, back to the forest, Sonian Forest. It's a 7-kilometer route that you can either walk or bike, skip or cartwheel, whatever you like to do in the forest. But what is important here is the stops that you should know about. We have the Lake of the Drowned Children, the Birch Tree Memorial, the Stonehenge, and the Hippodrome in Groenendaal. So I don't know, maybe you don't recognize these paintings. They're not all that famous unless you are very into art, an art connoisseur. These are two paintings painted in the years 1871 to 77. And these are by Auguste Rodin, who spent some time here in Brussels, doing some sculpture actually for the Bourse downtown. And he was captivated by the forest. He loved taking walks and especially going there to paint. So these are in the Rodin Museum in Paris, I think. And now for the ponds of the drowned children, our first stop. Well, you can see the pond over there and the bridge that crosses it. It's 3 ponds, and the route across these ponds were inspired by the ancient Roman legend of the dead who are ferried across the river Styx. So a very mystic and dramatic name and setting, of course, and therefore it must have a very dramatic story to tell. There once was a mill on the edge of the pond. It belonged to a man named Verdronken. Upon his death, his children inherited the mill and the fruitful fishing ponds around it. And in a good spirit of camaraderie, the siblings, they got into the habit of referring to their property as the mill of the Verdronken children, or de molen van de Verdronken kinderen in Flemish. Then one day, brutally attacked by a bad translation, the kinderen Verdronken became Verdronken kinderen, which literally means drowned children. And for the blessed man, because the blessed man's name was indeed Mr. Drowned when you translate it from Dutch. So there's really no dramatic story here. It's just a classic Belgian confusion. Therefore, I kind of love this story. And when you pass this area, you're actually passing great archaeological sites of human settlements from 3000 to 2200 years before Christ. Stone axes, arrowheads, scrapers, hammers have been found there, and they are now kept in the Royal Museum of Art and History here in Brussels. So that's another visit you can take. And also, not far from the ponds, you have multiple visible tumuli, so burial mounds that were probably built during the first millennium before Christ. And on we go into the forest a little further, and then we reach the birch tree circle. The 32 birch trees you see were planted in the memory of the victims of the 2 terrorist attacks in Brussels, the 22nd of March 2016. The trees, as you can see, they are very equally spaced in a circle, and it's to create the impression of people standing and holding hands, one for each victim of the attacks. The trees stand out from their surroundings because the birch tree have wide stems and the other ones are dark oaks. So it's quite subtle but yet impressive. And inside the circle you can see a smaller circle. And this is a natural stone, Belgian bluestone, which is traditionally used for tombstones. So it's a quiet and yeah, very impressive memorial when you have the context of it. A little further into the woods we go, and we arrive at something that would seem as a prototype for the Stonehenge. Well, it's actually a much more modern construction. It was put up in 1920 in the memory of Belgian forestry workers who died during the First World War. And there you can see the names of the men who the stones are attributed to. On each of these monoliths, you see their name, and so and you will also see the place of his origin. They come from all over Belgium, and because they come from all over Belgium, it was decided to place their monument in the most central forest of Belgium, the Sonian Forest. They all died in various circumstances, but I specifically want to tell you the story of JeanPierre Biebulem, pardon my French. So, JeanPierre Biebulem was a forestry worker in the town of Tervuren in the Ardennes. Early morning on August the 20th in 1914, a German infantry division enters the town. They stop the parish priest, yelling that they had been attacked by some local snipers and demanded to know who they were, or else they would set the village on fire, which they frequently did, pillage and plundering. The priest was ordered to gather the villagers, the people of the town, and convince them to cooperate with the Germans. Meanwhile, the Germans were searching the town. At the post office, they find 2 postcards that JeanPierre had posted the day before. The only the one postcard was supposed to go to his superior in the nearby town, and the second one was to his neighbor's son who was serving in the Belgian military. The neighbor's name was Nicolas Leboeuf. Of course, and in these postcards he stated that after inspection the region is calm. Well, having this substantial evidence, they of course concluded that JeanPierre and Nicolas Leboeuf were the snipers. So they immediately searched the house of JeanPierre and Nicolas, and the only thing they found was hunting bullets, no weapons or nothing, but this was enough to have a trial in front of the whole village. JeanPierre, his sons, 2 sons, Joseph, who was 19 years old, and Emile, who was 15 years old, along with Nicolas, were arrested. But the youngest son, Emile, he miraculously escaped and managed to hide, while the other ones, they were paraded through the village to a nearby field and shot. By coincidence, Emile, the youngest son, he was hiding in a barn just close by, and he witnessed the slaughter of his father, his brother, and his neighbor. The bodies laid there in the field for the next 3 days, and Emile, of course, terrified and paralyzed with fear, didn't move out from the barn. It wasn't until the 3 days later that he recognized some villagers coming to bury the 3 men that he dared to come out and to tell the story. Well, and we continue into, well, further, excuse me, I want to get a glass of water. So, further into the woods, we would arrive at the Hippodrome de Groenendael. And of course, it was Leopold II, the builder king of Belgium, who initiated this project. It was inaugurated on the 22nd of July, 1889. The reason is because Leopold found the Hippodrome in Boitsfort in Brussels too small and whimsical. It wasn't fancy enough for him. And he wanted to make the most beautiful hippodrome in Europe for the beau monde, for them to enjoy the races and gamble. So of course he did. It was at the beginning a classical round track, actually ran counterclockwise. But 2 years later, the racecourse became world famous when they added a straight 1,600 meter track. And in 1910, they added another track to this, which was a construction of a separate 8-figure obstacle course. So they would have bushes to jump over and hurdles and such. And what's brilliant about the 8-shaped race course is they would pass twice in front of the spectators. So Hrannendal thus became the only race course with 3 separate tracks and for 3 separate disciplines. And you can see the splendor of the track there, and down the corner. The Royal Lodge is centered in the middle, and on each side you will have the spectator area. It was expensive to even sit there, so the common people, they would sit in the center circle of the racetrack with their own chairs and own special entrance. They weren't allowed to enter at the same place as the king and the people with a bit more money. And so the number of the obstacle races, the 8-shaped obstacle courses, were limited per year. And on Ascension Day, the race was especially popular and famous. It was estimated that half the people of Hoylard, a very, very big city, attended the races. And the receipts that were exceptionally high from that course. So it was generating a lot of money. And on the right, you see the Royal Lodge that is still there today. So this is perfectly accessible and visible for you now on your walk. Here we see the first Royaltribune. This picture is taken in May 27, 1901. And there you see King Leopold. And you have his son, Prince Albert, the young Prince Albert wearing his officer's uniform. And he later became the soldier king. So, of course, you have more than just the tracks, the Royal Lodge, and the spectators area. There was a weighing house for the jockeys to come in, where they had to weigh themselves with the saddle before the race. There were various stables. There was an infirmary for both horses and jockeys. And there was also the bookmaker's pavilion, which you see in the top picture to the left. The big house is the weighing house, and the long pavilion there is the bookmaker's pavilion. It's not a beer tent. It's for making bets and gamble. You can see how popular it was. And the big picture to the right is what is still left of it. It's just adjacent to the Royal Lodge, so it's perfectly accessible as well, although in bad shape. Below, you would have, the railway station that was specifically built to access the Hippodrome. Just to give you an idea of how popular and frequently visited these tracks were, this railway station connected to Brussels had 5 platforms and 10 tracks. So this was a busy railway station. And there you can see people coming to and from the station, and with the caretaker's house at the end. And one more side note with the bookmakers, because the people who had more money, this is situated at their area. But people who were a little less off also wanted to place their bets. So there was a big black market for this. And the black market bookmakers, they positioned themselves on the edge of the forest. And they had signalmen who were watching the races and had specific signals passing down the forest to inform of the results from the tracks. And this is, of course, was highly illegal, and the police was trying to find them and stop this black market dealing. So they had spies themselves who lurked around and warned the signalmen with specific sounds if they saw the gendarmerie or the police. And it quite frequently happened that there was some kind of a chase or a rundown during the races. Must have been a lively place to be. So what happened and where is this now? After World War I, a storehouse and an ammunition depot had to be set up to dispose of and mine the remaining ammunition from the war. The Belgian government was looking for a place away from the inhabited environment and preferably in a wooded area in the woods. So they chose the Gronendal racecourse, and their preferred labor were German prisoners of war. On December 31st in 1918, so shortly after the armistice, the first German prisoners of war were brought here, and soon they were numbered up to 600 prisoners working in the area. This is a picture from the site. They were kept in tent camps in the forest in the middle of the winter. And this was just behind the railway station. So today, when you're driving the ring and you pass by the Royal Lodge, you can actually see it when there is winter time and it's not leafy on the trees. On the other side of the ring, there would have been the railway station. So there we have the German soldiers. Well, yes. So I hope you can see the conditions they were living in, these tents. Each tent would accommodate around 10 soldiers or prisoners of war. And they also had the bigger ones that would accommodate up to 45 prisoners at the same time. So what happened? On May the 6th, 1919, a German prisoner, of course it wasn't a Belgian one supervising them, it was the German prisoner, we don't know. He's smoking his cigarette and he tosses it away without giving it much thought. The burning cigarette then turns into a fire, spreading like a lightning, and triggers the first ammunition to explode. And this ammunition in turn detonates another ammunition, and a terrible domino of explosions unraveled. The explosions lasted 6 hours, and shells from this flew into the center of Hoylart, which is 4 kilometers away. So you can imagine the destruction, and 42 men were killed, no civilians, and many more were injured. Several buildings in Hoylart were badly damaged, and a random thing, in November again this happened. So you can see from the pictures here the destruction, how it was. If you remember the slide with the railway station and the caretaker house, you would see that in the top corner, the top left corner, that's what was left of the railway station. The Royal Lodge on the other side, and down below you have what was left of the ammunition, or part of it then, after all these explosions. So needless to say, the Royal Lodge was in ruins and most of the buildings, and so they were demolished. But in 1924, they built a new Royal Lodge. That's the one we see today. After the Second World War, the race courses were opened again, now bigger than before, and it flourished like in the 20s. And actually in the 60s, where it was the glory days of the Hippodrome, the Gronendal. After that, it just went downhill. In the 70s and 80s, people preferred taking the cars over than riding the train. And the problem with the track course in Grønnendal was there was very limited parking. At the same time, gamblers are moving more towards lotto than the race course. And there was a mismanagement of various Belgian racing clubs, so it all kind of came crumbling down during that time. And on June 16 in 2001, the last horse race was held here. After that, this stood just to be neglected, and finally, in the year of 2012, this was demolished. But thankfully, they left the Royal Lodge and the pavilion behind. And if you go there to visit and stand by the Royal Pavilion, you will see very clearly how the track course was laid down. And when you have this insight, it's very impressive to see. Today, they have remodeled the Royal Lodge, and they use it for events and seminars and all kinds of events. So if you're ever hosting something and you want to be grand, you can try this venue. I think it would be a great experience. And so this is the end of my 2 suggestions. Of course, there are so many more what you can see and do here in Belgium. But I think this is a wide spectrum within one trip each. I have 2 slides of how you can do the walk. I think we will just maybe add it to the email or something. Eleanor will maybe help me on that. So this is the walk in the Sonian Forest. You can have which public transport to take. If you don't want to walk back, this is the stations to hop on and hop off. And if you're hungry, there is the Le Beauty Gastropub. Excellent recommendations. It's right nearby the train station in Hoylard, or Bosfor. And if you feel like walking back, there is a stop right where I have marked the red ring, and you can have a good soup or hot pasta over there. So I am going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much, Stella. I can tell you that interesting for. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I can tell you the presentation was even interesting for Belgian people than I guess for expats people. So I feel like I want and have to refresh my view on Brussels. Thank you very much for sharing all those stories with us. Please all be informed that the presentation, so the slides and the recording will be shared with you after in the next days, so after the session. Does anyone has some question or a comment or a suggestion to share? Please, if you have, unmute yourself and talk, or just drop your input in the chat box. There is someone typing, so oh, it's a thank you note. Yeah. So Marie-Cécile says that, and I think that's the case of everyone, we have been walking a lot in the Forêt de Soignes, but now that we have all those stories in mind, that will be a different walk. True. Yes, true. And Elizabeth, of course, whenever the borders are open, feel welcome, and we could maybe even take a walk together. Yes. So maybe we can end the session here. This was the last conference of our cycle dedicated to expat families, and I'm very happy we could have such a closing, so thanks again, Stella. The next conference cycle will be dedicated to expats starting a business, and the first conference will be held on the 20th of May, with Massimo Mason speaking about the process of applying for a professional card. Again, thank you all for joining the session on behalf of Laurent Dans from KBC Brussels, Expat Banking Services, and on my own behalf, Bright Expats Relocation Services. So, hope you will all take care, be well, and we'll be in touch again soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.